Hello, and welcome to the Argyle AI Leadership Forum, Shaping the Future with Intelligent AI Solutions. My name is Michael with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, BMC Helix. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us on X at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, be sure to subscribe to Argyle on YouTube for exclusive access to all our past events. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we've set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us. Now let's get started. Without further delay, our opening speaker lectures on AI machine learning at the University of Texas at Austin and the University of Chicago, and as vice president at Leighton Bridge, an AI and automation services company, leads AI transformation, risk governance, and centers of excellence delivery for Fortune 1000 organizations. Please welcome Mark Ritzie for his opening keynote presentation titled From AI Ambition to Enterprise Execution, Building Scalable, Intelligent Organizations. Mark, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome, and over to you.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Mark Ritzie, and today it's my pleasure to kick off this session. And so without further ado, I'm going to jump into the agenda since we have only about 30 minutes together today. And so first, I'm going to cover a specific AI use case or scenario, and it will show the opportunity and potential with AI, and also how AI can go wrong. And so following that scenario, that I'll talk about a pilot paradox of how we experiment with AI and establish pilots to identify their potential and their opportunity and what difficulties arise from those AI pilots. Next, we'll talk about identifying the right AI opportunities. And so it's looking at metrics such as value and feasibility, together with risk and alignment to organizational goals. Next, I'll then talk about a governance framework. And so that is, how do we observe? How do we establish guardrails for AI itself? And then it's also establishing what is the trade-off between the governance of AI solutions and speed to market and delivery of these opportunities that can really deliver fantastic business results for our companies. And then next, I'll wrap up with some AI governance oversights, since we're talking about operationalizing an AI program, that I'll show a brief overview and oversight on a risk and prioritization methodology of how you can implement and how you can govern AI within your organization. So next, I'm going to jump into this specific AI use case or scenario. And I think this is a particularly very interesting one. And so there is a company that is named Klarna, and this might ring a bell to some of the attendees, is because they are a very popular online payment company. And so within online shopping, you'll particularly see their Klarna link. And so their business model is a buy now, pay later. And Klarna is a huge company, has thousands of customers. And so they did a very specific investment of $40 million on a AI solution that had to do with their customer service. And so their initial going in position to this AI use case is that they saw the potential of potentially not having up to 700 customer servant agent roles. Well, fast forward, and it turns out a year later that these same 700 human agent roles, they're back in the organization. So looking at some of the details here is that they had a AI chatbot that was powered by GenAI services or a large language model. This particular solution happened to use OpenAI at the time. And so their chatbot was deployed across 23 markets, and the goal was to handle inbound customer service. And so this was absolutely a flagship solution to implement AI and to replace that level one of customer service agents in work. And so within their first month, they had some fabulous metrics. They had 2.3 million chats handled. Their solution was handling over 35 languages. It had decreased the average resolution time from 11 minutes to just 2 minutes. And they had, again, a estimated cost avoidance of over $40 million. So now when you fast forward this timeline, that again, they rolled back their approach. And so those same 700 agent roles, well, they reevaluated and opened those positions to be staffed by human and actual workers. And so what they found in their particular use case is that the quality of their handling of AI for a lot of very specific situations that the AI did not handle those properly. And so some of these situations or exceptions, and they became even more than exceptions, they became so numerous of situations from more complex lending decisions to account closures to questions to real impact to their customers' credit reporting. They also dealt with a lot of particular really heavy and sensitive situations by their customers is because there was bereavement, there was family loss, there was job loss, there was fraud disputes. And those were all the type of situations that the AI could not handle properly. And then last to round this out is that they also had more complex handling, dealing with chargebacks and partial refunds, etc. And so these were all numerous situations that the AI chatbot could not handle well. And so their customer satisfaction or their CSAT score really it held firm on simple queries to the chatbot, but really dropped off a lot of dealing with these emotional and these more complex resolutions. And so Klarna really faced and dealt with a lot of brand and trust image. They had robotic scripts that were being produced by the AI chatbot, and that was just repeat explaining, and it was showing the chatbot failure had really eroded loyalty here. So again, the course correction, and I think this is a lesson learned for us all, that Klarna happened to reopen again these 700 customer support agent roles and had really taken a huge step back here. So now the question comes, well, we had a particular AI solution. This one was deployed to production, but data shows that over 70 to 90% of AI pilots fail to reach production. And this is for a variety of reasons. And I want to get into some specifics here is because I think this is really important for us to understand of how we're looking to roll out AI, either further scaling use cases, opportunities, deploy further automation within our organization by the means of experimenting with AI pilots. And so this failure happens for a few different circumstances. First off is data. And so since we're dealing with AI, that it's going to use data within your organization. It also may use data that is external to your organization. And so these external data providers, well, within financial services, there's many data feeds within other types of companies, within health, within manufacturing. Those external data providers can also be numerous. But even within our own data, is that when we're going to do an experimentation of an AI pilot that we may set up a separate environment, and that separate pilot environment is not necessarily reflective of our production systems. And so it doesn't have the full amount of data. The data may not have the same data quality checks and data lineage. It also, going back to the Klarna case, may not have all those different exceptions and all those different edge cases. And so, without a match of how your AI solution may operate in production with your real production data, you may face a complete mismatch of your AI pilot that is operating from a very different data set. Next is value alignment. And so this is one of the fundamental key driving factors for AI solutions, AI experimentation, AI pilots. And so first is that our AI projects, they must align to business value. They need to have a specific ROI that is driving that solution. And so I think we saw a particular uptick in many companies and many organizations. And even when Gen AI started to come on the scene in 2023, that there was a desire to start experimenting. We had a new tool, we had a new technology. Let's see what we can do with it. Let's establish a AI project, an AI pilot, and see what kind of results that we can derive from it. So we must pay careful attention for AI pilots in itself, that they must be connected to our business goals, our business drivers, and they must have specific metrics. And those metrics, they may vary by your specific use case or scenario. It may be a reduction in cycle time of your process. It may be an improvement on the number of customer tickets and the quality resolution of those tickets. You can have any number of business metrics. But those same business metrics, they must be used to identify your return on investment. And they also must drive the decision and action for really implementation, for their scaling to really implement either cost reduction, revenue uplift, or further productivity in that process or that workflow. The next is risk governance. And so this is absolutely a key factor. And so we have a number of different parameters around risk. And so some of those driving factors are data privacy, security, explainability of the AI solution. And this is particularly important is because now we have regulatory drivers, we have regulatory standards, both domestically in the US and internationally for those of us that work with multinational companies and we have a presence in international markets. There are regulatory standards such as the EU AI Act, or even in the US, there is the National Institute of Standards of the AI risk management. And so these are all regulatory guidelines that stipulate that we must be able to explain, we must be able to show how our models were trained, what data was used to train those models, and then what type of results or output that those models or those solutions are producing. And so a few other risk governance factors here, and that is responsible AI, and that you can take a look at that from privacy, transparency, accountability, security, human involvement of that particular AI enabled process. And this is important is because I think many of us are used to by now that AI can produce hallucinations. And so that is unfact-based statements. And so if you do not have a human in the loop there for responsible AI, that is a real risk to the solution and a real risk to the company. And then last, I'll just kind of touch on the pilot infrastructure silo. And so what I mean by that is that within pilots themselves, within that infrastructure, that there could be a different level of data cleanliness. There could be, again, those lack of those edge cases. There could also be the inappropriate design or the exception handling of your AI solution. And so this is something that an AI pilot might not cater for, is because AI pilots, they can be designed, they can be built according to a happy path, but they don't have those exception handling of how they're going to do with those edge cases. And then also with AI is that by the nature, it's a probability based type of solution. And so you must have the life cycle monitoring. You must have metrics that you pay attention to, how that AI solution is operating in production. And then furthermore is that you must be paying attention to even user and adoption metrics. And so these are all key and fundamental and really often prevent an pilot of AI scaling to full enterprise capability. So next, I'm going to go into a bit of detail about how use cases should be prioritized and a phased evaluation framework. And so, first of all, that there should be a process qualification. And so, when there is an idea or there is an opportunity for a business process, a set of tasks where AI could be used and could be implemented. So, a initial qualification there to determine if that particular process or that workflow is a good candidate for AI. There should be a level of repetition there in that particular set of tasks. And we may have use cases that could be of contract evaluation, right? So we have legal contracts. We want to do a scan of legal contracts and to extract certain clauses. And so that could be a one time use case. But really, what are the best candidates for AI is those repetitive processes. And so, customer onboarding, risk profiling, uh, transaction or payment processing to vendors, et cetera. Also, these types of processes that they should be rule driven. If you have a particular workflow and a lot of the rules or decision points that is subject to employees' human decisions or their experience, and those rules are difficult to quantify, that it's very important to pay attention to that to be a qualification driver. And then third here is data availability. And I already alluded to this is because having access to the right data, either for training the model, using data as a source to augment the results, right? And so we want to have a solution that accesses our own internal data or even accesses external data from data providers, that we must be aware of how we can get that data, what is the cleanliness of that data, and is that data ready and is it in a sufficient state to use for the AI solution. So based upon these pre-qualification factors, that you must do an assessment of identifying the business value or impact. And the business value, it's like I said before, it's a lot of those particular metrics. And the business values or cost reduction. It could be revenue uplift for marketing AI use cases. You may have other impact that could drive priority here, and that is regulatory needs. And so you can have a regulatory requirement. It is not necessarily tied to business value, but because it's regulatory of nature, it really raises the priority to take on that solution to meet those regulatory needs. Following that is that you must do a complexity or feasibility assessment. And so that complexity analysis, this can vary from doing a contract intake or a term parsing, that you want to make sure that your payment terms are the same for the complete library of customer contracts that you have. You might want to have 45 payment terms or 90-day payment terms. And so you may have any range of complexity or feasibility for your solutions, is because this can get particularly very involved, particularly when you start talking about agentic AI that is going to start taking actions. And so this technical complexity and feasibility must be understood and must be rated. And then I'm going to finish off here with a few other prerequisites. You must have a risk evaluation. You can have any number of risk factors here. Your risk evaluation should be tied to the underlying business process itself. And so if you have a workflow that is financial related, regulatory related, that will be, by definition, a much higher risk to your company than, let's say, a lower risk process that could be maybe marketing content generation. Next is the data readiness. I've mentioned this previously. You must have an understanding about the quality, the lineage, your different sources of that data, and your system of record that should be used. And also last year, your organization or your support and your adoption. And so you must have the business owners that are going to support this particular solution as you look to deploy it to production. You must also get a measure on really the sentiment. And so there could be a lot of anxiety about AI. And so that anxiety can be on department, job impact, potential job loss. And so those concerns can be out there. And so it is very critical to get in front of those really concerns, make sure that you have the appropriate communication, the proper messaging, and to adopt a good organizational change management approach to any of these AI solutions. So last year, I'm going to cover this prioritization framework. And so as you can see on the y-axis, we have business value from low to high, and then a complexity from low to high on the x-axis. And so if we take a look at this, based upon your qualification, your assessment factors, is that you can have a high business value and low complexity. So that is low-hanging fruit that you want to go after. You might have low business value, low complexity. Those could be very quick wins. You can have high business value, but high complexity. And so these will be very complex, even agentic AI use cases. And so these could be strategic initiatives, long-term programs that you want to pursue. And then last, just to round this out, is that you may have low value, but a high complexity. And those are typically use cases or type of scenarios that would be deprioritized. So moving along, that I've talked a lot about doing risk assessment and evaluating your metrics, doing where you stand with your data. And so this can be great from a governance perspective, but we must also operate our business. And so the question comes of, how do we speed governance along with operating and delivering speed to market? And so the primary suggestion here is that across your risk and your operational stakeholders, and that can be legal, compliance, information security, third-party risk, etc., to establish a pre-agreed evaluation framework with these risk and these operational stakeholders, and to do your use case assessment based upon a agreed evaluation framework that some use cases might just be too risky to pursue. The data is not clean. This is a incredibly high-risk business process that it relates to financial or again, regulatory reporting, but to have a quantitative scoring rubric or checklist so that you can go through and identify and score those areas around privacy, potential areas of bias, um, intellectual property infringement or risk, or even hallucinations of the solution itself. Then next, really set up the structure to do a rather rapid triage of that quantitative framework and to do a pre-screen based upon proper definition of the problem, the data, and the scope of the solution. And also identify what are some of your non-functional requirements, right? And so functionally, we know what we want the solution to do. But as far as data, as far as privacy and security, where is that solution? Where does that need to be hosted? Can we use a cloud provider? Can we leverage a hyperscaler platform like Azure or AWS? Or is the sensitivity of that information, must we host it on premises? The next is, these are often for commercial off-the-shelf solutions. And so that's why I have COTS here. And so for these that you want to have a evaluation is because we're not only evaluating our own custom solutions, but there's many enterprise solutions that we also want to do an evaluation of. And these are numerous and names that we know, from ServiceNow to Workday to Salesforce, et cetera. All these enterprise solutions, they're adding AI into their own applications. And so we must do an evaluation within our companies of the risk there, of the performance, what type of outputs. From a legal perspective, is our data safeguarded and is it secure? This really comes along with a security and privacy check involving some of your stakeholders, from cybersecurity, of doing a vulnerability scan, also identifying any regulatory impacts. Is because if we operate multinationally in other regions, those could have their own geographic regulatory requirements or constraints related to AI solutions. And then make a risk-weighted decision. And so this input from the pre-evaluation criteria to the cybersecurity scan, et cetera, these can be compiled and be submitted to an AI governance board. And to make the decision, is this a solution? Is this a pilot that we can approve and eventually scale to meet our risk appetite? And then also make sure you establish those post go live monitoring mechanisms. And so everything from the guardrails for the specific users that are approved to use the application, and also establishing the business and the technical KPIs that must be implemented to make sure that your accuracy, your bias is being controlled, that the solution is still delivering according to its business processes, that it is improving your cycle time or your customer onboarding, et cetera. So I'm going to wrap up here with a overall kind of risk governance approach, is because since we're talking about operationalizing AI and increasing the scale, I would be remiss that if I did not mention this. And so I think for many of the attendees, we're not a stranger to an AI governance committee or a steering committee. But I want to mention this is because this AI steering committee, it has a few different purposes. And so it is, number one, to review use cases. Number two, to align risk personas, right? What is allowed, what needs to be further evaluated, and then what is too risky. So for some of those financial or regulatory use cases. And so these attendees perform that initial assessment and consolidate the feedback. Also, you must have the proper representation of your business owner, who leads, who represents the specific automation use cases, who engages these other stakeholders from risk technology, cybersecurity, et cetera, and then determines acceptance based upon the residual risk. Is because we will always have risk with our AI solutions. They are probability based, but we can always, by working with these risk subject matter advisors, identifying the risk controls and the acceptable residual risk that remains after that. So again, I'm Mark Ritzie. I really love leading these sessions and speaking on these topics. I talk about use case prioritization, governance frameworks. In the past 30 minutes, I think, have barely touched the tip of the iceberg in regards to AI operations within the enterprise. You can find me on LinkedIn or feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to engage further.
Thank you, Mark. It was an excellent presentation. And let's jump real quick to some audience questions, and we'll take the last minute or so for that. So your first question is AI and ML improving patient outcomes and reducing caregiver burnout in healthcare?
Well, it certainly can. And so I like the nuance between ML and AI is because I think it's important that we must fit the solution to the right problem. And so with machine learning, those types of solutions have been around for some time now, before GenAI came on the scene. And so with typical machine learning is that we'll use that for prediction or potentially classification. And so I think this relates to healthcare very well, is because with machine learning, particularly with classification, is that we can follow a decision tree model based upon certain symptoms of identifying really what the most likely cause or particularly disease or affliction that the patient may be encountering. So machine learning definitely plays really a heavy part there. And so I think there's a lot of use cases, a lot of opportunities there. And then just to finish off on the GenAI side. So I think GenAI can be great with healthcare. And so it can be really applied in a number of different ways. And so for one is that we can have a very lengthy history of the patient. And so they can have very difficult, challenging diagnosis based upon seeing multiple doctors and specialty practitioners. And so we want a very accurate summary, concise recommendations, and that type of summary, an aggregation of all these different sources. That is where specifically GenAI can help. And it can also provide those recommendations on, with these large language models and how that they're trained, is that you can use their insight and their recommendations of that. You may look at these root causes, you might look at these specific treatments, and now it will be up to the experts, up to the practitioners to rely on those tools to really make the final recommendations and insights on how the best way to treat these patients.
Thank you, Mark. That was excellent. That's all the time we have for this session. Mark, it was wonderful having you here. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. Now, this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Our next session will begin shortly, which will be a panel discussion titled Scaling AI Responsibly, Navigating Adoption Challenge Across the Enterprise. Please remain on the stage, and then the next session will begin automatically. Look forward to seeing you there. Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you.